With the increase in interest around electric vehicles and also battery storage for power for those in areas where power is very difficult to come by, we've seen a lot of mining companies benefit. Lithium, copper, a number of other base and rare earths also benefiting a number of companies in the sector. Let's take a look now in some more detail with John Meyer from SP Angel, where he's mining analyst and partner at the company. There's a lot of news around this at the moment, and in fact you've been following news headlines out of Toshiba recently with progress that's been made in this area.
Yes, Toshiba, which is a very solid name in the industry, has announced they have a new battery which they can charge up in 6 minutes and give an electric vehicle 320 kilometers of range. Now that's a fantastic breakthrough. That means that filling stations, petrol stations, will have a new lease of life, because you don't want to be in there waiting for hours for your car to charge up. 6 minutes is about right. Go in, maybe grab a coffee, whatever, your car fills up and off you go. So if you start to look at the whole electric vehicle revolution, as I think it is, takes on new momentum. It can come through much faster than perhaps we were immediately envisaging. And of course, industry now has to run to catch up with this sort of development. Toshiba, not the only people making breakthroughs. Dyson was also talking about a vanadium battery that they're planning on using. And of course, we are trying to encourage the mining industry, not that they need a lot of encouragement, to push ahead to produce these metals, because the electric vehicles themselves and then the technology to power those electric vehicles are going to use a lot of rare earth metals, specialty metals, and basic metals like copper, zinc, and even a certain amount of iron ore.
The problem is with this, and going back to the fast charging point, I think we spoke about this a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about the copper business, and you were keen on the copper area because you're saying that cities and indeed individual homes need rewiring to cope with this fast charge that some of these vehicles are demanding. As I said, a 6-minute turnaround is phenomenal when you consider 11-hour trickle charge overnight is what is currently being suggested.
Well, we've been looking around to figure out, well, what's possible, what's feasible. The Chief Executive of the National Grid says that the grid will manage, but I suspect that is with a certain amount of upgrading along the way. The Green Alliance today reported that if you started charging more than 6 cars in your local area, and I assume that means your street, that will blow the local grid. So that's not many vehicles, to be honest. Most streets have a few more than 6 vehicles in them, and if we're all going to go electric, okay, even if we go half electric, we're still going to melt the system. So there's going to be a lot of copper required to, I think, to rewire the system. Or if we go for the Toshiba batteries, then they'll have to beef up the transformers to bring the power into those filling stations. They'll have to increase the copper cabling within those stations. They'll have to produce new electricity to power those stations. And let's face it, there's no point installing a large diesel generator at a filling station, because that's not going to help anyone, is it? So what they might do is install extra windmills. That will be the way to go, because wind power is now on a par cost-wise with nuclear power, so we're told. But wind generation requires an awful lot of copper, neodymium, dysprosium, and a whole bunch of other metals that are not that readily available right now.
Some of those are rare metals, rare earths, and I have heard, not being in the industry directly, but I've heard that it's very damaging to the environment to get these out of the ground.
Well, getting them out of the ground is pretty easy. It's actually extracting the metal from the concentrate, and that's why all that happens in China. It's difficult, it's challenging, you've got to get the chemistry right, and as with a lot of these things, it's not just chemistry, there's a little bit of magic in operating the process. It needs to be run with the right acid at the right temperature and the right atmospheric pressure, all those sorts of things. Some of that technology only actually resides in China. Not to say that we can't do it, but we know the European Union and the Americans are very keen to shift some of that production over to the West. You can't strategically, you can't have all that happening in China. Otherwise they're going to get such a big advantage and lead over everyone else. So with Volkswagen, BMW, big auto companies pushing ahead with plans to develop more and more electric vehicles, that production needs to be brought over here. There is a proposal to build a rare earth refinery on Teesside in the UK, and I think that will get huge support from the government. And that will require rare earth concentrates to come from wherever. Makango, for example, has an operation in Malawi. That's not a mine yet, but They've done all the work that says that it could become a mine. It's a good project. There's another one, Peak Resources in Australia, that has a project in Tanzania, but of course the Tanzanian government's made life difficult for anyone to export any metal concentrate out of Tanzania. So for now, Makango is one of the very few places where you can go to get these sorts of rare earths, heavy rare earths, to feed the new industry that's going to develop.
You mentioned vanadium in the context of the announcement recently from James Dyson and wanting to use solid-state batteries. Where should we go for exposure to the vanadium market?
Well, Dyson's a very smart guy, and he's developed his own type of battery and his own technology. Bushveld Minerals has the largest reserves of vanadium in the world, I believe. It has a producing mine and a processing facility, and that's doing very well. It's throwing off heaps of cash flow because the vanadium price is high. The vanadium prices jumped because the Chinese suddenly woke up and realized that they need to be putting more vanadium into their steel in order to harden it, otherwise their buildings fall over, and when there's an earthquake everything collapses. So they finally said, right, we're going to have to follow the rules and regulations. This is the vanadium we need. Prices rose, but at the same time a lot of people are looking at these new vanadium redox batteries. They're large scale, big grid scale units for providing backup power supplies, for providing overnight storage when the sun's not shining and the solar cells are not working. This is where you store the power so that people can keep the lights on. And I think more and more of those batteries are going to be created, and they use a lot of vanadium. So for me, vanadium has several avenues of use, and I think all of those are growing.
I think it's worth revisiting this copper subject as well. What's your pick in the copper space?
Well, certainly the big institutions are very interested in buying copper, and it's always been a popular metal. It's a good investment metal. There's good demand in the world for it in general, just for wiring and cabling. But of course, as this electric vehicle revolution develops, we're going to have new cables for streets, more cables for cars, cable the filling stations. There's just so much of it that's going to be required. For example, you need tons of it for your average windmill, and we're installing thousands of windmills all the time. So there's a lot of that to be used. The other metal to perhaps remember is also nickel. There's a lot of nickel that's used in windmills, in electric vehicles in general, in the battery packs. And it's just one of many, but copper and nickel are the two big metals there.
And the exposure one would get if you're an investor in this space, which companies are you talking about?
Well, we would be talking about, on the nickel side, I suppose, there aren't too many on AIM at the moment, this Horizonte. These are companies that they don't hang around too much. If they develop a mine, they tend to either move up into the mid-tier very quickly, or they get bought by one of the majors. First Quantum Minerals was a very good example of that in copper, still a great company. But Georgian Mining for copper, and maybe look at Ortac for copper and cobalt, for example. So there are some options here.
You speak as well about the growing interest in this, and almost what would appear to me to be an energy which might actually end up seeing this increase as we saw possibly at the dot-com boom. Do you think it's that sort of environment?
Yeah, I think it's going to be huge, and I think the analogy with the dot-com boom is quite likely to come right. No doubt following the boom there might be some sort of bust, but I think the momentum is really just beginning to get going. If you look at a company like Georgian Mining, it's sitting on what looks like it's going to be a very large copper deposit. It's only £20 million market cap, which is relatively minor given what we think is going to go on there.
Yeah. Okay, interesting space. John, thanks indeed for your time. That's John Meyer. He's partner and mining analyst at SP Angel, with his look at the increasing interest in those companies around the new and exciting area of electric batteries.